Earlier, I sat down with a senior fellow from the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Karim Sadjadpour. I began by asking him, will Rouhani be able to secure his second term as well as the nuclear deal?
Well, Iranian elections are always impossible to predict. And I tell people in America, with all of America's polls and big data, no one got the US presidential election right. No one predicted Donald Trump. So in Iran, which is a much more closed society, it's difficult to make these predictions. One thing we do know is that every single presidential election in Iran since the 1979 revolution has been won by the incumbent candidate. So that would seem to point in the direction of President Rouhani winning a re-election. I think that he delivered on his main campaign promise of 2013, which was the nuclear deal. And his competitors aren't particularly charismatic or appealing. So if I had to make a prediction, which is never wise to make predictions about Iranian politics, I would say that Rouhani has a pretty decent shot at being re-elected.
Yeah, but he also faces a number of challenges, especially when we talk about the Iran deal. A lot of the Iranian people seem to grow impatient because they have yet to see the promised economic benefits from this deal. Is that really true, first of all? And secondly, if so, what are possibly the reasons behind it?
Well, I think popular expectations for the nuclear deal were probably unreasonably high. You know, Iran has been an economy which has been isolated for many decades, and it was going to take longer than just a couple of years to emerge from isolation. I think that for a lot of countries around the world, Iran is a very promising place to invest because it's one of the largest populations, 80 million people, which is still really cut off from the global economy.
Yes.
But I do think that the prospect for Iran's reintegration with the global economy is going to be, multiple decade-long process. And I think that while it's true that people were expecting more as a result of the nuclear deal, I don't think there's any other presidential candidate who is offering a more persuasive model for Iranians than President Rouhani.
Do you see the election results affecting the future of the deal in any way? If President Rouhani is re-elected, do you see that the deal is a bit more secured?
That's probably correct to say. This is Rouhani's legacy, the nuclear deal. So he will do everything in his power to make sure Iran is abiding by it and to make sure that the deal is preserved. If another candidate, like the conservative hardliner Raisi, becomes president, I think that the likelihood that the deal unravels is a little bit greater. But ultimately, as you know, the most powerful individual in Iran is not the president, it's the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And again, I think that neither Tehran nor Washington will want to be blamed for this deal falling apart.
The supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, he from my experience covering the Iran talks, we had the impression that he has always talked very harsh. Even when there were promising signs, he had always shown very proud position of Iran. And now again, he has just criticized President Rouhani for saying that it was not him who secured victory, who staved off the threat of war for Iran, but rather the Iranian people. What is his position on President Rouhani, and how much is his position influencing potentially the outcome of the election?
So I think this is the challenge for Iranian presidents, because in many ways they're auditioning for two different constituencies. On one hand, they want to appeal to the Iranian people. On the other hand, they also want to appeal to the supreme leader. And the supreme leader has a very different worldview than Iranian society, which is, very young, and they want to be part of the outside world. They're not ideological. I say that Iranian society wants to be like South Korea. Elements of the Iranian regime want to be like North Korea. And so I think that as of now, the last 3-4 years, the supreme leader and President Rouhani have had a fairly cooperative relationship. And I think there's a smart strategic argument for Ayatollah Khamenei to keep President Rouhani in charge, because it's a good way of staving off international pressure, because many countries around the world, including many of America's allies around the world in Europe, see President Rouhani and Foreign Minister Zarif as pretty reasonable people, and it's much more
educated
people. And if you remember,
educated in the West.
Absolutely, yeah. And if you remember, the person who really played an important role in isolating Iran internationally was Iran's former president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And under President Rouhani, I think it's much more difficult for the United States to assemble a global coalition to isolate Iran.
Also, there is the problem of a lack of trust or the deep mistrust between Iran and the United States. I mean, things were just beginning to improve. Then you have these rhetorics that you're hearing from the White House. And also, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson recently accused Iran of being a leading state sponsor of terror through many platforms and methods. That's not going to help things.
Yeah, I think that the Obama administration had made more effort than any U.S. administration since 1979 to try to change the tone and context of the U.S.-Iran relationship. And you won't see that same effort from the Trump administration. I think this is a national security team which is deeply cynical about Iran. President Trump's top advisors, several of them served in Iraq in the aftermath of the Iraq War, and they hold Iran responsible for the death of over 1,000 U.S. troops in Iraq. So I think that they're not interested in engaging Iran the way the Obama administration was, and I think that very much is a danger, that we see a deterioration of relations which could lead to the unraveling of the nuclear deal, which could potentially lead to conflict.
That's really unfortunate for all the people who spend so much time and effort to bring that deal about, and China as well. China participated very consistent and put a lot of effort to bring all parties together. How do you look at the effort that China has put in trying to secure and push for the implementation of this deal? Just end of April, China and Iran signed the agreement to start redesigning the Arak light water reactor.
Well, if you speak to U.S. officials, particularly Obama administration officials, they will tell you that China played a very constructive role in diplomacy and a constructive role in trying to compel Iran to agree to compromises on their nuclear program. And technically, China has, as you mentioned, played a constructive role in helping to restructure this Arak reactor. And I think that China in many ways can be a very useful example for Iran, because China was also a country which was isolated and had a cultural revolution and decided in the 1970s to put its economic interests and national interests before revolutionary ideology. And I think people like Hassan Rouhani see the example of Deng Xiaoping as a very positive one, and they aspire to do the same thing. But you also have powerful forces in Iran who fear that if Iran reintegrates with the global economy, that would threaten their hold on power. So I think this battle in Iran is going to continue to play out over many years.
Yeah, now there is an alternative. This reintegration into the world economy has a different version, which is called China's Belt and Road. That is the Chinese version of globalization that we're trying to explain and to make more people understand and come on board possibly. And Iran is a very important country along the route. Do you think there's an opportunity there for Iran to develop its economy, to achieve some kind of prosperity through a different model instead of, the usual opening up in the Western sense?
Well, Iran's economy is very different than that of China, and that, like Russia, it's a very resource-rich economy which hasn't had to rely on its labor force as much as China. And I think whereas China really, when it made the decision to open up economically, it invited in foreign investment in a significant way. It had to adhere to, global standards in order to attract that foreign investment. Iran is, I think, still many, many years away from that point, but they do like working with China because they prefer these more transactional relationships with countries like China, as opposed to certainly the United States or even some European countries that may lecture Iran about its domestic behavior and human rights practices.